Hi guys, it's Sarah. Today I'm going to be talking about women in the Second Spanish Republic in Spain. So the key points that I'm going to cover are the status and role of women in Spain, the Second Republic and the Constitution of 1931, improvements and advancements made for women that really came about through this new constitution, and one of these advancements in particular was women's suffrage and them gaining the right to vote. So, just a little background in starting out. The Second Spanish Republic began in 1931 and was the democratic government that existed in Spain between the ruling of Alfonso and the end of the Spanish Civil War. It lasted until Francisco Franco took control of the country and established a dictatorship for 40 years. This was a really huge time period for women, and before the Republic officially began, much of the population felt as though the position and status of Spanish women in the house, civic life, and the workplace should be improved. Their status for women, the status for women and girls was really unequal and needed to be changed. To start out highlighting the place women had at this time, we can look at the 1930s census. The census recorded a high level of 32% of adult females were illiterate compared to the male level of 19%. And this was really due to girls almost only being educated until elementary school, and they had no access to university education. Because of this, the only distinct profession a woman would have held was as an elementary school teacher. Another key element in society was the significance of family and motherhood was promoted and highlighted by the Catholic Church. They were a really powerful influence in the lives and culture of Spain's citizens. And so the Catholic Church promoted motherhood as the sole purpose of a woman's life. The census revealed only 9.2% of women worked, and those who did in paid employment primarily did so until they were married or had kids. And 4% of the workforce was only married women. And so even with this recording, the largest occupation given for women in the census was being members of the family, with over 9 million women. Of working women, domestic service was the most common occupation, with 1/3 of women. This job entailed harsh and unfair working hours, low pay conditions, employers, and harassment. Other women worked for pay in more traditional occupations, including dressmaking, embroidery, and lace making. And then outside of the home, women were typical to work in the textile industry, and of the skilled workers, 82% were mostly in textiles, clothing, weaving, and working with fabrics. And outside the home as well, but not as common, was shoemaking, baking, paper manufacturing, food processing, and working in the tobacco industry. But with all these jobs, the most common similarity is that they weren't very high skilled jobs, and most of women were working in the home or with domestic service. But the 1930s showed to be a time of growth and advancements. The 30s and the Second Republic was a time of a growing commercial sector. This industry employed about 40,000 women in shops, hotels, and offices. Under 1,000 women were able to work in banks and insurance companies, finding their way into those jobs. But notably, the communication sector was growing and expanding and employed women in the postal, telephone, telegraph services, especially women in the lower and middle class. Leading up to the 1930s, there had been new sentiments and desires for change and more rights for women in all aspects of life. Prior to the Second Republic, the dictator General Miguel Primo de Rivera, he understood these sentiments and was really a leader in spearheading change, and with having such a high position in politics and the government, being the dictator general. But in 1926, he appointed 13 women to the National Assembly that was going to discuss the new constitution. Having women on this board was instrumental and really important for the new outcomes and advancements that were to come. And so he really played a part in implementing many instrumental and groundbreaking policies and laws for women. Some of them included family benefits for workers and state employees with a large number of kids, um, obligatory maternity insurance for women workers, and this required medical assistance and a few weeks paid maternity leave for women workers who qualified for these benefits. But these are really foundations to the systems and laws that continued and were brought forth during the Second Republic. And so that's why these are really instrumental and groundbreaking for General Miguel Primo de Rivera to have helped install and implement. And so then the Second Republic began in April of 1931, and the new Constitution was approved in December of 1931. A huge change that was brought about was that it accorded equal civil and political rights to women and men. Article 2 stated that all Spaniards are equal before law. Written in the 1889 Civil Code, what the country and government policies had been going by beforehand. A wife could not acquire or dispose of property without her husband's permission. She had to adopt his nationality and was completely subordinate to her husband, and so really giving women equal rights and equal status to men was completely new for the country, while other countries and other governments had already installed this, like France, the United States, other countries. This was completely new and groundbreaking for the society and politics of Spain. So major changes were made, and entire sections of the Civil Code of 1889 were taken out. Primarily the separation of church and state, the first statutes of the autonomous regional governments, Catalonia and Basque Country, processes for autonomy were approved, and then really more in relation to women, many reforms were also included in this constitution. First, education. The constitution mandated that there be obligatory mixed gender free primary education systems created, and so this gave an opportunity for all kids, boys and girls, to receive an education, and it really improved the status and lives of all families, but particularly these kids. And so another improvement was in the section of land and agriculture. Large sections of land were given to lower class and poor segments of the population. Previously, a lot of women did work in agrarian jobs, as they did have lower levels of education and not as much access to skilled labor. So creating more policies and giving back land to these poor segments of the population and lower class families was really important. And then in terms of labor, public offices were always open to men, and few women had held positions, but it was now mandated that they be opened up to women and they be given the same conditions as men. These conditions were 8-hour working days, minimum wage, and paid holidays. But these conditions of the working day, wage, and holidays was across the board in all occupations. While they might not have been installed and held up to standard in many of them, it was really important that this was written in law and a basic standard for employers to uphold. And then with the separation of church and state, women could now file for divorce, as they could be recognized as divorced in the eyes of the law. And so divorce was completely illegal beforehand, but now it was really important and that women could file for divorce. And then abortion and contraceptives became legal as well, giving women more power in terms of her own health and safety, giving her right to her own body. And then a major establishment and advancement in this constitution was that it included the right to vote for women. While there was always opposition to these reforms by many political groups, I think it's important to mention and kind of remember that the fight for female suffrage was an issue which not all women approved or supported. But it was really spearheaded by Clara Campoamor, who aligned with the radical socialists. She was an example of a young woman who came from a modest background to fund her own education and worked to get where she was. She was described as the very embodiment of the new woman in Spain. She worked tirelessly, both as a lawyer and as a Republican politician, to give other women, by legal right, the opportunities she had created for herself, the positions that she had held in politics, and she argued that female suffrage was essential to society and politics, but also directly in line with the women's equality. And so, on the other hand, when I had mentioned that other women were not in favor of women gaining the right to vote, the main head of this opposition and the main face of this was Victoria Kent Ciano, who was also a Spanish lawyer, and she was aligned with the radicals. She opposed women gaining the right to vote and believed women need to become more educated before undertaking this responsibility. She and others proposed the argument that middle-class women with little to no experience beyond the household would use their voting power to support reactionary politics. And so in 1931, women fought for the right and won the right to vote. Parliament passed women's suffrage 161 to 121 votes. And then in November of 1933, it was the first time women were able to vote in a national election. The last time before the end of the Republic and start of the Civil War that women were able to vote was during the national election of 1936. But it was huge that they had won the fight and gained the right to vote and were actually able to carry out this right in these two elections before the Second Spanish Republic ended with the Spanish Civil War and the official start of the Francoist Spain in 1939. The Second Republic is an example of a regime that used the new constitution to bring about radical changes that were opposed by many, but is a time where women in Spain saw policy and law positively work to impact their lives and fight for equality. It also served as a foundation and framework for the fight for women's rights and equality. It can really be categorized as a successful time in terms of advancing women's status and opportunities on paper. However, it would still take time to shift the view of women and their status culturally and socially. Even the fight for women's equality still continues today. But going off of this, a couple things to think about or discuss would be how would Spain or the U.S. or any country, I guess, in particular, be different if women never gained the right to vote, to sit in Senate? What about the right to work or own property? And then what challenges remain for women in Spain today? And how can understanding history help us overcome those challenges? And that is all. So thank you guys for listening, and yeah.